The snow was falling that night in Vermont, thick and silent, like the world itself wanted to bury me in white. I stood on the porch of my daughter's boarding house, clutching 2 suitcases and an old wool scarf. My breath came out in shaky clouds. "Mom," Claire said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the cold, "this isn't working. You don't fit our lifestyle. We need space. Find somewhere else to stay." Her husband, Mark, appeared behind her, holding a glass of red wine as if it were a trophy. He didn't even look at me when he muttered, "She'll be fine, Claire. Just let her go." Let me go. I had raised her alone after her father died, worked nights at the library so she could go to college, even sold my grandmother's wedding ring to cover her tuition. And now, at 64, I was nothing but a burden to be shoved into the snow. My hands trembled as I set the suitcases down, not from the cold, but from the humiliation burning in my chest. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was louder than thunder. My own flesh and blood had just locked me out like a stranger. I wanted to scream, to beg, to demand why. But instead, I stood there in silence, because sometimes silence carries more weight than words. Behind the frosted glass window, I saw them laughing, already celebrating my absence. That was the night I learned. Sometimes the people you give everything to are the very ones who will throw you away without a second thought. The shelter smelled of mildew, sweat, and something sour that clung to my clothes no matter how many times I scrubbed them in the sink. I laid on a cot wedged between 2 strangers, one snoring through his broken nose, the other mumbling in his sleep. The hum of flickering fluorescent lights above me was constant, like the world mocking me for still being alive. I pressed my wool scarf against my face, the same scarf I wore the night Claire slammed the door. The fabric held the faintest trace of lavender from my old home. I held onto that scent like it was the last piece of dignity I had left. Every morning, I lined up for stale toast and watery coffee served on paper plates. I used to shelve first editions, guide children to their favorite stories, lecture about the beauty of books. Now, I was just another old woman in a line of forgotten souls, waiting for food someone else had decided was enough. At night, when the coughing and muttering died down, I'd stare at the ceiling and replay my daughter's words. "You don't fit our lifestyle." Each time they sliced me open again, deeper than the night before. I had $600 in my purse. That was it. No house, no car, no family willing to claim me. Just 600 crumpled dollars and a notebook of quotes I'd collected during my 40 years as a librarian. And yet, some part of me refused to let go. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the memory of all the nights I stayed awake sewing clothes for Claire when she was a little girl, determined that she would never feel poor even when we had nothing. But in that shelter, I made myself a quiet promise. I may be broken now, but I will not stay broken. Not forever. It was a gray Saturday morning when I wandered out of the shelter, clutching my scarf tighter against the wind. The flea market sat at the edge of town, rows of sagging tables piled with other people's leftovers, chipped mugs, broken toys, boxes of clothes that smelled faintly of mothballs. And then I saw it. A young man was trying to sell a cardboard box filled with books, their covers torn, pages yellowed, spines cracked. $10 for the whole box, he sighed as if even that was too much. I knelt beside the box, my fingers trembling as I lifted a worn copy of Little Women. The binding was split, but the pages were intact. Another volume, an old leather-bound Shakespeare's sonnets with a faded inscription on the inside cover. To my dearest, 1932. Something inside me stirred. These weren't just books. They were stories abandoned, forgotten, discarded like me. I gave him my last $10 and carried the box back to the shelter like it was treasure. That night, while the others slept, I sat under the dim light by the vending machines, carefully mending the covers with scraps of fabric and glue I'd begged from the churchcraft closet. My fingers moved with a kind of reverence, as if I were stitching myself back together with every repaired page. The next weekend, I returned to the flea market with 3 restored books. I laid them on a borrowed table, unsure if anyone would care. Within an hour, a woman picked up Little Women and gasped. "It looks brand new," she whispered, clutching it to her chest. She handed me $30 without hesitation. $30, triple what I'd paid. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the realization. If the world was willing to throw stories away, I could bring them back to life. That night, as I tucked the remaining books into neat piles, I felt something I hadn't in months: purpose. For the first time since Claire locked me out, I didn't feel like trash. I felt like a rescuer. And maybe, just maybe, I'd found the beginning of my way back. By the 3rd weekend, my corner of the flea market had turned into a tiny oasis of stories. While others sold rusted tools and used coats, I laid out rows of freshly mended books with cloth covers I had stitched by hand. Customers started to recognize me, the book lady. They'd bring their coffee, browse, and sometimes stay just to talk about the titles I'd rescued. But the shelter wasn't a place to build a future. The mildew, the noise, the constant turnover of broken souls, it drained me. So when a church friend whispered about a dusty attic room above a bakery, I leapt at it. $300 a month, no heat, just enough space for a cot and a folding table. Still, it was mine. I filled that attic with stacks of forgotten books from garage sales, library throwaways, and thrift bins. By day, I roamed the town with a canvas bag, hunting for cast-offs. By night, I sat under a single lamp, repairing bindings with needle and thread, cataloging titles in a spiral notebook. And then came the library computer. Every morning, I'd sit at the public terminal, teaching myself how to list items online. Etsy, eBay, even a small blog. I didn't have money for marketing, but I had something better: stories that people craved. Orders trickled in. $12, $18, $25. Every PayPal notification felt like a miracle. I bought bubble wrap instead of food some weeks, telling myself survival was worth the hunger. I even invested in a cheap ink stamp with my shop's name. The Forgotten Shelf. One snowy night, as I stacked freshly bound volumes against the wall, I whispered to the books, "We're all the same, aren't we? Thrown away, but still full of life." That attic smelled of dust and bread from the bakery below. To anyone else, it was nothing. To me, it was the quiet forge where I was rebuilding not just old books, but my dignity. No one knew it yet, not Claire, not Mark, not the neighbors who walked past me like a ghost, but something small, stubborn, and unshakable had begun. Spring came late that year, but when it did, so did opportunity. A retired professor stopped by my flea market table one Saturday, his tweed coat smelling faintly of pipe smoke. He picked up a copy of the Federalist Papers I'd rebound in navy cloth. "Where did you find this?" he asked, eyes wide. "I saved it from a library discard pile," I said carefully. "Repaired the binding myself." He turned the book over in his hands, running his fingers across the stitching. This is museum quality. You realize there's a whole market for restorations like this." That single sentence was the match to my tinderbox. Within a month, he had connected me to a local university archive desperate for affordable book repair. They sent me their first batch, 20 battered volumes they couldn't afford to replace. I worked on them night and day, my fingers raw, my back screaming from hunching over the table. But when I delivered them back, polished and sturdy, they cut me a check that made my knees go weak, $2,000. It was more money than I'd seen in years. More importantly, it was proof. Proof that what I was doing wasn't just survival, it was valuable. I invested every dollar back, rented a small workshop in a forgotten wing of the textile mill at the edge of town, bought proper tools, bone folders, archival glue, leather scraps, hired a college student who loved books as much as I did, paying her out of my pocket. And then, almost by accident, one of my Etsy posts went viral. A photo of a 1911 children's fairy tale collection I'd rebound in floral fabric. "Saved from the trash, now reborn," the caption read. It was shared thousands of times. Orders flooded in not just for books, but for custom requests. Suddenly, I wasn't just the book lady at the flea market. I was the founder of the Forgotten Shelf, the woman who could bring paper ghosts back to life. For the first time since Claire slammed that door, I walked through town with my head high. People recognized me not with pity, but with respect. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. My daughter thought she had discarded me, but what she really did was set me free to rise. 5 years later, the smell of dust and bread from that attic was long gone. In its place was the scent of polished oak and old leather, the perfume of my new home, the Whitmore estate. A 3-story Georgian mansion, 10,000 square feet, complete with a private library that stretched 2 floors high, its spiral staircase gleaming under a crystal chandelier. When the realtor hesitated, "Ma'am, the asking price is $3, $4 million, and it's the most prestigious address in Brookfield Heights," I simply smiled. "Cash offer, close in 2 weeks. Brookfield Heights, the very neighborhood my daughter Claire and her husband Mark used to drive through on Sunday afternoons, pointing at the grand houses with wistful sighs. Someday, they'd say. Someday never came for them, but it came for me. I signed the papers with steady hands. My company, The Forgotten Shelf, was now generating millions in revenue. Universities, collectors, even publishing houses sought me out, and every contract I signed was another brick in the palace of independence I was building. The day I moved in, I stood at the massive bay window of the master suite. From there, I could literally look down at Claire's modest little house across town. I wondered if she still told her neighbors I had moved away, or if she dared admit she'd thrown me out like trash. That evening, I unpacked the one item I had carried with me since the shelter, the old wool scarf. I draped it over a velvet armchair in my new library, a reminder of where I had started. And as I ran my fingers over the spines of first editions, now resting on my shelves, volumes that had once been discarded, now displayed like treasures, I realized the symmetry was perfect. Claire had thrown me away. Mark had laughed at me. But just like these books, I had proven that what is discarded is not worthless. The breaking point had come, and it was not mine, it was theirs. Because in the very place they had always dreamed of, I was the one standing tall, with the keys in my hands. The doorbell rang at 9:00 a.m. Sharp, less than 24 hours after the real estate pages announced that Margaret Hayes, the woman everyone thought was long gone, had bought the Whitmore estate. I glanced at the security monitor. There they were. Claire in a blazer a little too tight, her husband Mark shifting nervously in his khakis, and behind them, 2 teenagers I barely recognized as my grandchildren. I let them stand in the cold for a full minute before opening the door just enough to be polite. "Mom," Claire said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We just wanted to congratulate you. What an accomplishment." "How thoughtful," I replied, my hand still on the doorknob. "Congratulations delivered. Anything else?" Mark cleared his throat. We've had a rough year, mortgage issues, college applications. We thought maybe." His eyes flicked over my shoulder into the marble foyer, greed written all over his face. There it was, the real reason. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. If they wanted to play house in my mansion, they'd do it under my rules. They gasped as they entered the sweeping staircase, the Persian rugs, the two-story library glowing in the morning light. My grandchildren's eyes went wide. "Dad, look at the books." One of them whispered. I let the silence stretch before I spoke. "6 years ago, your mother locked me out of her home with 2 suitcases. Your father laughed as the bolt slid shut, and now, suddenly, family matters again." Claire stiffened. "That's not fair, we were under stress." "Stress doesn't excuse cruelty," I cut in sharply. "You stole 6 years of birthdays, school plays, and bedtime stories from your own children, not from me, from them." The teens turned, confused. "Mom, Dad, what is she talking about?" I walked to a cabinet and pulled out an envelope, yellowed at the edges. "Ask your father about the night he came to my attic apartment, drunk and sobbing, begging me to come back. He wrote this letter, 3 pages of apologies, and then he asked me not to tell your mother because she'd threatened to leave him if he brought me home." Claire's face drained of color. You wrote her a letter," Mark stammered. I didn't mean." "Oh, you meant every word," I said, holding the letter high. "You admitted you chose convenience over conscience. You let your wife's pride matter more than your children's grandmother." My granddaughter's eyes filled with tears. "Mom, Dad, you lied. You told us she moved away, that she didn't want us." The weight of 6 years of deception cracked open right there in my library. I stood tall, voice steady. "This house, this business, this life, I built it all from the nothing you left me with. And now you come here asking to share it. No, not anymore." Claire's mask slipped, anger flashing. "We're family. You can't just shut us out." I smiled coldly. "Watch me." The silence in my library was thick, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Claire stood rigid, her cheeks blotched red with fury. Mark looked like a boy caught stealing candy, shoulders hunched in shame. But the children, my grandchildren, didn't move. They stayed seated on the velvet sofa, staring at me with wide, questioning eyes. I softened my voice when I spoke to them. "You've been lied to, not by me but by the people who should have told you the truth. I never left you. I was pushed out, and I never stopped wanting to be part of your lives." My granddaughter's chin trembled. Can we come back, just us?" I smiled, my throat tightening. "Any time. This house, this library, this heart, they're open to you whenever you choose. But understand this. Respect is the price of admission here, and I will never again beg for it." Claire snapped. "You can't just cut us out. We're your family." I turned, gesturing to the shelves that rose around us like a cathedral. "Family isn't blood, Claire. Family is who shows up when you're broken. Family doesn't throw you away like yesterday's trash. These books were abandoned and I restored them. But you made your choice." Her mask shattered then. She grabbed Mark's arm and hissed, "We're leaving." But the children didn't follow. Emma stood and said softly, "I think I'll stay with Grandma a little while." Tony nodded, defiant. The look on Claire's face, a mix of rage and realization, was the sweetest justice I'd ever tasted. She stormed out, Mark trailing behind, their voices echoing angrily down the marble hall. The door shut. Silence returned. I sat with my grandchildren for hours, showing them photo albums, telling them stories about their father as a boy, the Little League games, the nights we'd read together until he fell asleep. They laughed, they listened, and for the first time in 6 long years I felt whole again. As the sun set beyond the tall windows, casting golden light across the room, I leaned back in my chair. The mansion no longer felt like a monument to revenge. It felt like a sanctuary of truth, not revenge, justice, not bitterness, freedom. That night, as I closed my journal, I wrote a single line. Sometimes the sweetest victory isn't slamming the door. It's opening it only for the ones who truly deserve to walk through. And with that, I finally felt at peace.